The world's population reached 7 billion in 2011. This marks a global milestone and presents obvious challenges for the planet. There are extremely densely populated cities and sparsely populated countries. China is the most populous country, with India following closely behind. The largest generation of youth in human history is on the way. In many parts of the world, people living in the countryside have moved to cities, pushing urban areas far beyond their capacity. Yet in some parts of the world, population growth rates are declining, with a few countries even experiencing negative growth rates. Many societies are aging, and in some nations, the increasing proportion of elderly in the population is placing pressure on existing public sector pension systems and social welfare programs. These dynamics pose challenges for governments. There are positive trends for human population growth as a whole in many regards. Some analysts believe that human beings are parasites and that they're just living off the earth and completely reaping the resources. Humans will continue to reproduce and technologically advance, and thus the questions of overcrowding and a lack of adequate resources to account for everyone come to mind. For example, because of the abundance of people, Houston, in particular, is one of the 9 communities recently identified by Housing and Urban Development as being a high priority for addressing homelessness. The coalition is working with local leaders and service providers to determine how to improve these services. These officials will help the community with its plan and focus on children and families, a growing segment of the homeless population, and the mentally ill, who too often clog jails and emergency rooms. Unfortunately, even more confusing regarding human population is what to believe about the future. On the one hand are predictions of population overload and global starvation. Already, 1 billion people do not have enough to eat, and 2.5 billion have no proper sanitation. Yet, our species is on track to add another 2.3 billion to the population of planet Earth over the next 40 years, mostly in poor countries. This, plus the growing appetites of fast-developing countries such as China, will raise the demand for food by 70% over the same 40 years, according to the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization. Not only that, but trends suggest that population growth is a self-limiting phenomenon. The rate of population increase peaked in the 1960s. It has been steadily falling ever since. The UN now projects that world population will peak in about 2050. And later this century it will start to fall off, perhaps quite quickly. If the growing global population is a problem, it's one that is in the process of solving itself as it tapers off, hopefully. The aging of the human race has been faster than anyone could have imagined a few decades ago. Fertility rates have plunged globally. Simultaneously, lifespans have increased. The result is a contoured age graph. The pyramid, once with a tiny number of old folks at the peak and a broad foundation of children, is inverting. In wealthy countries, the graph already has a pronounced middle age spread. People have to extend their working lives far beyond the traditional retirement age just to cope. Countries may in fact start competing for immigrants as a solution. Every minute of every day, according to the Population Reference Bureau, the number of births exceeds the number of deaths by 158. But the growth isn't spread evenly. Of the net increase, 154 of these 158 are in the developing world. The global transition to lower fertility has many factors, including a basic change in attitudes towards children. In societies with high infant mortality or without social programs to support the elderly, parents desire many children as a kind of insurance. Some countries, having lots of children was considered to be a patriotic duty. For example, China at one point under Mao Zedong made heroines of women who had large families. However, as we know recently, in the 1970s, China abruptly reversed course and instituted a coercive one-child policy that sent the nation's birth rate into free fall. It's unclear how big the population will actually get. The planet added 1 billion people in net in the past dozen years, which is now more than twice as crowded when Barack Obama was born. The most likely scenario, the UN says, will put the population at 12 billion at the end of the century and have it growing only modestly. However, a small uptick in the predicted fertility rate could result in a world with 16 billion people. Anything less could mean a drop to 6 billion people. There's so much variation and uncertainty that it's hard to justify and accurately predict these trends. Another uncertainty is the extent to which environmental problems and resource scarcity will bend the population curve. People are contributing to climate change, acidifying the oceans, clearing the rainforests, and pushing species to extinction, among other behaviors that do not appear to be sustainable over time. Unfortunately, this is the fate of the human race as they constantly vie for living space and conditions. Life expectancy in China is increasing, but the number of young adults is plummeting due to strict birth control policies. Just as has happened in Japan, a rise in the ranks of the retired elderly and a relative decline in the working population will result in a decline of China's domestic savings. Similarly, Nigeria is growing. 300 million people, a population about as big as that of the present-day United States, will live in a country roughly the size of Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada. In this commercial hub, where the area's population has, by some estimates, nearly doubled over 15 years to 21 million, living standards for many are falling. The Nigerian government is rapidly building infrastructure but cannot keep up, and some experts worry that it and other African nations will not act forcefully enough to rein in population growth. For 2 decades, the Nigerian government has recommended that families limit themselves to 4 children, with little effect. Population is a very pervasive issue. It not only affects the developed countries, but also the developing countries. As countries such as China and Japan have more elderly individuals, smaller countries like Nigeria and Somalia are constantly growing and have issues with spacing. Unfortunately, as a whole, as population growth sends human beings into once isolated ecosystems, new disease vectors also thrive. Our agronomists have lost some of their confidence that food production will keep pace with these rising populations. What will it take to reach inaccessible rural population whose ideal number of children is quite high? All of these factors make it so difficult to focus on the future rather than what is happening now. The challenge of soaring populations will increasingly be concentrated in the poorest countries. The biggest problem is how individuals are focused on the now rather than the later. Sure, there are some fixes to these resource and spacing problems, such as leaving it and hoping it stabilizes itself because of the carrying capacity, and resource manipulation by going green and recycling more and using more renewable sources of energy. However, as population continually grows, there's no telling when the carrying capacity will be hit, or if it already has been.